Hello everyone. Okay, so today we are going to discuss something we refer to as the science of man. We're going to be looking at government. We're going to be looking at how people kind of interact with each other. And I think what you see here is the impact of using like the scientific method and ideas of Newton to kind of understand the underlying principles of humans and life and government. Okay. So the first guy I'm going to talk about is David Hume. David Hume wrote a variety of different things, and one of his big works here is the treatise on human nature. And you see here on the right, a wise man proportions his beliefs to the evidence. It's very, very interesting that the idea of observation and reflection, they're grounded in a system. Okay, and it's not necessarily always, though, how cause and effect work. So the idea with his system is that you have to kind of open your mind a little bit to stuff, and you have to look deeper. Okay, because the idea here is that we often believe that one thing causes another, right? But there is just as likely a chance that the thing that you think was a cause isn't. And I know it sounds a little crazy and it's kind of got a little skepticism in it, but the idea here is that each effect has some type of cause, and actually ultimately we'll never truly know what was the original or initial cause of anything. And so what this is starting to play with the idea, like in physics, of really the dawn of the universe, and also the ideas of Newton, the equal and opposite reactions and stuff. Now for him, religion was really important, okay? That religion answers this because God is there, but we'll never really know that he's there, and that's kind of a big deal. But what he says in the end, though, is since the world seems orderly, that proves the existence of God, right? Well, I'm sorry, he postulates the idea that a lot of people say, well, since the world is so orderly, that shows us that there has to be some type of creator behind it, like it's planned. He, on the other hand, says that chaos does exist, and that God could be similar to us or even mortal, which is a crazy type of thing. But the idea is that, again, that there's all these causes and effects that are out there. You have to get deep analysis of stuff, and that you shouldn't just assume that A causes B. And for him, he had a lot of mistrust of anything, that he felt that we can't predict future outcomes based on past results. And so the idea of that, if we can't assume that everything is always going to work out the same. And science does that, and you can retest things and retest things and retest things, but you will never 100% know. I mean, and there's some scientists that talk about the uncertainty principle and stuff like that, and we'll talk about that later, but that's really, really impactful on how it goes on. And the fact of the matter is, he said that everybody pretty much simply embraces the idea of causes and effect because it makes our lives easier. Now, he also looked at morality, and here he's a little bit different. Here you see morals excite passions and produce or prevent actions. Reason of itself is utterly impotent in this particular. The rules of morality, therefore, are not conclusions of our reason. So the idea is that morals only exist because we objectively like them, that there are no universal or scientific bases for morals, and the idea that all humans will support morals, it depends on the group, okay? And that if the idea of, for instance, that murder should be illegal benefits the majority of society, then most people will say it's immoral to kill someone. But another society might look at it differently. And so in a world at this time when so many people are trying to, I guess you could say, look for general laws and stuff like that, Hume comes out and goes, it's also subjective, that good luck even studying it. And it's something that he's going to make people think. Then you have a different guy, this guy, Baron Paul de Holbach, who kind of comes up with this concept in his book System of Nature, that humans are basically machines and God is simply a product of the human mind and unnecessary for us. What? So this is one of those guys that I guess you could call him an atheist, but he is the kind of extreme end, I guess you could say, of the Enlightenment, in that the only thing that matters is reason. And it doesn't matter what causes the ideas of that come into our mind, it's just the fact that they're there, okay? And he says, let us persuade men to be just, beneficial, moderate, sociable, not because the gods demand it, but because they must please me. Let us advise them to abstain from vice and crimes, not because they will be punished in the other world, but because they will suffer for it in this. As a philosopher, he focuses on the now. And he's really, really impactful here, because the idea of questioning religion is going to be something important that we talk about. And again, if you believe in God, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. We're not here to debate religion, but what we're looking at here is the impact that religion has on the development of European society. And it had had so much control and had so much influence for so long that it's not surprising, okay, that we see a backlash against it at some point, and Holbach was one of those guys. Now, the big guy at this time for me to hit on is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was born in Geneva. He lived from 1712 to 1778. His father was not necessarily the most trustworthy guy, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but his father had to flee the country to avoid prosecution for something. His mother died shortly after he was born. He was actually raised by his aunt and uncle, and then in his early years, he kind of wandered from place to place, and in 742, he basically pops up in Paris and begins publishing. And it's interesting, he really looks at society, and we're going to see him have like two views of society. Some people say it's an evolution of his thinking. Some people are saying what he just gets impacted by, but it's going to be interesting to look at, and I think a lot of people come down as one or the other. So his first view is what he calls the natural view of society, or the idea of the noble savage, okay? And basically the idea here is that people are corrupt, and that society is corrupt, and that society is what actually makes people unhappy. Too much order, and the whole idea is that that individuals should only focus on advancing the society, not themselves. And the idea is that art and science are actually not beneficial, and that the progress of knowledge, so this idea of art and science, has actually led to governments gaining strength, which leads to them crushing liberty. Okay, and that there's no such thing as freedom. And then this idea of materialism, that in these societies of which he was living in the 1700s, that people cared too much about having stuff, and that the focus on materialism actually undermines the possibility of like friendship and happiness, and all people care about is getting stuff, while at the same time they're crushed by the government. And basically all you really have is an atmosphere of jealousy, fear, and suspicion. When in essence, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the simple lifestyle, without these modern societies as they were at the time, is really where it's at. And he says here, in reality, the difference is the savage lives within himself, while social man lives outside himself and can only live in the opinion of others, so that he seems to receive the feeling of his own existence only from the judgment of others concerning him. So the idea is he isn't like that stuff, that we don't really look at ourselves and we don't, get deeper because of society. And that's what he starts with, but then he goes in a different direction, and later on he comes up with this concept of the social contract. So this is New Rousseau, in which he believes that the actual state of man is brutish with no law or morality. So that's not very good. Okay, and he says that in essence, when he looks at it more deeply, we're more successful when we're part of a group, and that group is known as the collective human presence right there, okay? And that basically people what he also, though, does say that private property is bad, that he still keeps the materialism thing. And a lot of people feel that his ideas here are the forebears of like communism in economics or socialism in the political realm. But the whole idea is that he sees that a goal of the government needs to secure rights and peace for its people, as well as at the same time that the will of the majority is not necessarily always right. And that the three things the government needs to secure for people are freedom, equality, and justice, and it should be done for all people, regardless of background or economic status. And again, this is the idea of the will of the majority is not the way to go. And he feels that politics and morality should not be separate, that political leaders should lead moral lives. And of course, this is anti-Machiavellian here. And what's really important is that if a state does not act in a proper and moral manner, it will cease to exert its authority. And thus, people can revolt and should revolt. Okay, and that's really, really crucial for him here. Okay, and as a result, he becomes one of your most ardent abolitionists in the world. His most famous phrase, "Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains," I think that speaks for itself. Again, this is something that liberty is broken because we have slavery, and we should revolt, we should overthrow this type of situation. He's not a fan of Christianity. He feels, again, that probably that it's not necessarily real, but he feels the idea that the church and Christianity in general has made quote-unquote slaves out of people because they have to follow all these rules. So he kind of looks at it as that you have to do all this stuff, and it doesn't necessarily please God, or you don't know if it pleases God. And all of it seems to be about getting into heaven, and none of it is about like living your life right now. And so he wasn't a big fan. Yet then on the flip side, so it seems all, he's questioning authority, this or that. He does not believe that women are equal to men, and he speaks out against them, and it's like super frustrating. So, he's an interesting guy that's kind of this paradox, if you will, of like, this paradox of contradicting himself a lot, if you will. I probably didn't use paradox right there, so sorry about that. So, he's pro, no slavery, but women should be subservient. He believes in the noble savage, and then we need all this other stuff. It's very, very fascinating, but nonetheless, he's super influential. And the last guy is, it's all about the money. And if you don't know the reference on the bottom, that guy's name is Rod Tidwell. Look it up. Adam Smith, he is a tremendously influential person, really ever. He was born in Scotland. He eventually goes to Oxford on scholarship and becomes a professor of logic at Glasgow University. And he was really interested in human beings. Which was weird because he didn't like to interact with people. He lived at home his whole life. He was really socially challenged. He was almost scared of people, and so as a result, he really dives into books. Okay, he's always reading. He's known as a great teacher. Someone said that he seemed not to be sufficiently possessed on the subject, yet in a minute or two he became fluent and poured out in an interesting series of animated arguments. Like he could just show people how things worked. And for him, it was all about economics. And he is the guy that kind of takes a lot of the economic ideas that were really popular at the time and consolidates it all into one general system we know as capitalism. And the book is known as An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. We really just call it The Wealth of Nations. And the whole idea here is he does a historical study of economics, and he looks at all these different versions, and what he does is he looks at the nations that were successful, and he says, okay, here's what we got to do. And the first and foremost is the role of the individual, and the concept of the individual is that they need to do as much as they possibly can for themselves. Okay, and he says that every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital or money that he can command. It is his own advantage indeed, and not that of society which he has in view. Okay. And he goes on to say that he generally indeed neither intends to promote the public interest nor how much he is promoting it. Okay. All he cares about is himself and his security. And that's okay. Okay. Because if you're doing that, okay, you're going to end up working with other people that will advance yourself. And that's okay. Okay. And he has the help of his brethren, not necessarily because he loves other people, but because, again, he needs their help to help him. Again, then that's okay. Okay, and that's the whole idea of economics, because what the idea behind it is that there is an invisible hand out there. Okay, and the idea of the invisible hand is that people are being pushed by this hand to actually do what is beneficial for a large economy by taking care of themselves. Okay, and here's a quote that helps out with that. And he says, and he goes on to say, let me find, I want to make sure I say it correctly here. So, he will be more likely to prevail if he can interest their self-love, other people, in his favor and show them that it is for their own advantage to do for him what he requires of them. Whoever offers to another bargain of any kind proposes to do this. Give me that which I want, and you shall have this which you want, is the meaning of every offer. And it is in this manner what we obtain from one another, the far greater part of those good offices which we stand in need of. It is not from benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities. So the whole idea is that what we're going to do is work for us and us and us, and inherently it helps everybody else. And as a result, I have here pricing and competition. As a result, what happens is that if I'm a business owner and I am doing a business to make money for myself, I'm going to price things appropriately so people will buy them, because if I don't do that, then people won't really effectively, if you will, have success, because if I price it too much, then they can't buy it, and then it doesn't help me. And so it all kind of ends up working together without outside influence, and competition shows up because the idea that having more than one thing makes those things inherently better. So if you have one person that does something, it can be okay, but if you have two, they have to respond to each other. And we're going to get more into this in class. And in the end, the role of the government is to promote business and stay out of its way. So how do you promote business? You build roads, you have trade agreements that help people sell their stuff, and then you prevent monopolies, because monopolies are bad. And then in the end, when you do all those things, business does well. So your job after that is to stay out of the way, to leave things alone. All right? And this is really the core of economics in the world. And when you look at these philosophers, they're incredibly impactful, and we'll get into all of them deeper, all right? Make sure we get our assignment done, and I'll see you guys soon.